good morning, afternoon, or evening, and welcome to the Bloody Disgusting Network. The passage of time will now bring you to something strange, unique, and idiosyncratic. Have a good time.
My friendship to all of you precludes my involvement with any one of you. But if you wanna make love, then I do too, and I'll be right there behind you. All in the name of oh, all in the name of oh, all in the name of oh.
Greetings and welcome yet again to the Losers Club, a Stephen King podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Justin Screw the Yankees Gerber. Today, we're going to play two, to steal from Cubs legend Ernie Banks, the late, great Ernie Banks. And we're going to cover not one, but two Stephen King baseball projects that he worked on with writer Stuart Onan, the first of which is 2004's Faithful, a book consisting of, according to its cover, quote, two diehard Boston Red Sox fans chronicling the historic 2004 season. And the second project we'll be covering is a 2012 short ghost story by the name of A Face in the Crowd, not to be mistaken with Face in the Crowd, starring Andy Griffith, a movie I have yet to see. It's supposed to be great. Anyway, who cares about all that? Joining me is a podcaster who has a silent letter in his last name, but he is silent no more. Dan, please introduce yourself. And speaking of sports, tell us how you're feeling since your alma mater won a basketball championship just, 2-3 nights ago.
This is Dan, the great Gambino Flieger. I should say go Gators. Yeah, you're right. That was a pretty exciting game. I got into the tournament pretty heavily this year because the Gators were favored. Mm-hmm. And that was a pretty exciting last few games, especially like the last minute. Houston kind of broke down.
Well, it's interesting because, and if you're listening, folks, this is going to be a very sports-intensive episode, so just buckle up. But it was funny because Houston had that incredible comeback against Duke. Duke gacked in the game before, you know?
Yeah.
And it's so funny that they absolutely gacked in the championship game. So that's what happens when you throw a bunch of 19-year-olds on the court in the national audience.
You know what I mean? Because I generally watch professional sports, but because I do get frustrated with the lack of quality of play sometimes in college, but then you do have to take into account that they are young. Being in the national spotlight is pretty stressful. You know, it
used to be those athletes, they'd go to school for 4 years. So college basketball was awesome in the 90s especially. You know, you'd have people like those Duke players, they would go to school for 4 years straight. So you guys kind of know the players at that level. And then they were old enough to kind of jump into the NBA and be able to be good right away. But we're not here to talk about college basketball. Although, again, congratulations on Florida winning championship.
It's my third basketball championship. They won my senior year. So
and how many football championships have they won? Two?
Heisman.
2 or 3.
Won. I got. We'll talk about it when we talk about our teams we root for. But I got spoiled in like a 15-year period where every one of my teams was winning, and it's a great feeling.
It's a great feeling. I was actually at Florida State when they won against Virginia Tech against the wonderful Michael Vick. I was there at Florida State when they won the championship.
Warwick Dunn was playing?
Yeah, Warwick Dunn. No, Peter Warwick.
Peter Warwick was also playing, yeah.
And then Warwick. I can't remember his name. He was the running back. That was a couple years earlier, I think. But then I actually went to the championship game my sophomore year in Miami, but they lost to Oklahoma. But that would have been pretty great to be at the game. And then, of course, well, we'll get into our other teams, like you said. And we should note right now, Flieger and I, we have now read every Stephen King book. Now, there's a smattering of short stories out there I don't believe I've read. But I've read now, and you have too now, every single book.
I as a Yankees fan, I've always put this off because I'm like, why would I want to relive that? But I'm glad I did read this book.
You had plenty of championships before and, one after that make it a little bit easier.
Yeah, and I think it contrasts really well with, King waiting for so long and the joke of, on his tombstone, like, not in your lifetime either. And it's so funny to, the taste that we had that was rooting for the Cubs, who I know was your favorite baseball team.
Of course.
But they're a tertiary team for me, but I still support the home team. And that was really exciting. I know we were both outside the stadium because it was in Cleveland, but everyone rallied to Wrigley Field. And I mean, it was like a festival. It was so insane. Like there were so many people just going nuts. It was crazy.
Well, they're saying right now they're congregating outside. Half are congregating outside your apartment and mine because, besides the fact that we have now read everything, as of this recording, the Losers Club, after the end of this recording, and once we submit it, the Losers Club podcast will now have covered every single Stephen King book. We are all caught up. It's pretty incredible. I'm happy to be on this episode, and it's just like we planned it. The final episode, not the final episode of the podcast, but we're officially covered everything episode is on Faithful. But
everything that's been published, you should say.
But they're about to celebrate outside when we're done with the episode. So I'm looking forward to joining in the revelry.
Yeah, the cops are surrounding my entrance with riot gear as we speak.
That's right. Oh, and they've greased the light poles outside. Nobody's gonna be tearing down street signs. But before we can go celebrate outside Flieger, we got to get to our first one, and that's going to be Faithful. Again, this was co-written with Stuart Onan. Now, Stuart Onan, for those who don't know, he's a well-regarded writer, born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, home of his first baseball love, the Pittsburgh Pirates, which he talks about in Faithful. And it was later, when he went to Boston University for college, that he became a fan of the Boston Red Sox. Now, I'm not sure about you, Flieger, but this made me like sick to my stomach because my constants, for better or worse, since I was 8 years old, were the Cubs, the Phoenix Suns, and the Arizona Cardinals. Now, I should also preface this by saying the Cubs were on WGN, which was nationally broadcast, and the Braves were on TBS, which was nationally broadcast. When I lived in Phoenix, the Diamondbacks were not around yet. It would be 10 years later, and I was long gone by the time they showed up. So it was the 1 year in '89 that the Cubs were better than the Braves. So I became a Cubs fan. I would have been much happier if I become a Braves fan. That's neither here nor there. And that's why I'm a Suns and Arizona Cardinals fan. So, but Flieger, can you ever imagine outright, not like rooting for, like you said, you kind of were like rooting for the Cubs because of the circumstance and being in the city, but can you imagine outright changing sports allegiances?
Well, so I actually, kind of like you too, I have two kind of home bases. So I was born in New York. So the first sporting event I ever went to was like as a baby to the New York Yankees. And like I went to like a couple dozen games as a little kid. And then my family moved to Central Florida, like Tampa area. And that's when I took an interest in hockey, kind of shifted a little bit away, played baseball, but kind of shifted to soccer. So the Tampa sports teams like the Buccaneers, the Lightning, those are kind of my big go-to teams. We didn't have a basketball team there, and I didn't really like the Magic, but I like the Heat. But also as a kid, as a kid too, Michael Jordan was so like all over pop culture. And I remember one time my family, we were at Disney World Resort, the All-Star Sports Resort. It's kind of the Econo, and we watched the Bulls championship, jumping in the bed in the hotel, and they had like Michael Jordan gear all around Disney and like, you know, cutouts of him. And it's like for a middle school kid to just be watching Michael Jordan slam dunk a ball while at Disney World was just like such a hype moment. So Jordan,
I was like, Jordan is so ubiquitous. Even I had a poster of Michael Jordan. You know what I mean? And I was a huge Suns fan. I will say that when the Suns lost the finals to the Bulls, the next day or the next weekend, whatever day it was, I remember I took down the poster and I burned it in our front yard. My parents were very concerned with my fandom in my youth. I would get upset in a Cubs game in which they were already bad the whole season if they lost against the Pirates on the road or something like that. Like, I was inconsolable when it came to that. Yeah.
And to go back to your question too about like changing alliances, like, so yeah, like I root for Chicago teams as long as they're not going against my team. But I've been in town when they played one of my teams in like the Stanley Cup, and I was hating it. I was just like, I hope the Cubs never win. Like, I hope, you know, and I was just, once it goes against your family, then you get defensive. But I think even now, like when, you know, playing like fantasy football and other gambling activities, things, right? I start to not root for other teams, but I find the players interesting. Like there's players that I'll follow, and especially with like NBA where they're jumping teams so often, I find guys that I like, and I like watching their gameplay, but I don't necessarily root for their teams. So and I think the criticism of players jumping is, it's like, oh, isn't there any, you know, allegiance anymore? But as a fan, I'm also a little guilty of that because I jump allegiances with fantasy football a little bit. You know, I don't like the Eagles, but I had Saquon on my fantasy team, and
that's the great hypocrisy is fantasy football and fantasy basketball. I definitely still do fantasy football. We talk about this often during the NFL season. And
I think
it's difficult because, I try my best not, because I'm a Cardinals fan again, I try my best not to have NFC people on my team, but like I wouldn't say I'm not going to draft DK Metcalf or something like that. You know what I mean? Like I have to, you're trying to win. You're trying to win no matter what. So if they're playing against your team and they do well and they win, well, hey, maybe at least you got some fantasy points. But at the same time, it does change how we view sports.
And tying this book to Boston sports. So, for example, I hated Tom Brady. I don't like Boston sports. It's the inner New Yorker as a child. You're conditioned for it. But as soon as Brady came to the Buccaneers, I was like, he's actually a pretty cool guy. And
100%.
I'll take a championship. But I was a hypocrite in the process, and I was happy to do it.
I was when Kevin Durant went to the Golden State Warriors. I remember I just called him the worst names that you can call somebody. But as soon as he was being rumored to go to the Suns, I was like, oh, this would be great. I think Kevin Durant's one of the greatest players we've ever had. And it changes on a dime. That's the good thing about sports fandom. It's the one thing you can kind of be fickle about and not feel guilty about. You know what I mean? You can have, it's like bad faith fandom versus, I'd rather be like a bad faith fan who can kind of look the other way when it comes to sports decisions, not necessarily like literally poor, indefensible off-court behavior. But you can do that in a way you can't do that in real life.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's kind of a safe zone for that.
And I think just to let the listeners know too, like me and Justin, we're not going to get too wonky on the sports talk, but I think me and you are probably the biggest sports fans amongst the Losers Club.
Oh, my joke was going to be that like we had to have like a face off against everybody to decide who was going to be on this episode.
Well, I reached out knowing that because I was like, I know Justin knows more about baseball than I do. I'm like, but I would wager I have the second most knowledge on the pod.
Probably. So.
And I'm glad it worked out this way. And but I say that only as a caution that even if you don't like sports, I think you could enjoy this book, and I think you'll enjoy this episode because it gets a lot deeper than
it does
the sports itself.
And there's some really, I think I've seen some cool reviews about that topic. So we're definitely going to talk about do you think this works for people who have no idea about the ins and outs of baseball? But we'll definitely get to that later on. But back to Onan. So, as all great writers do, he went to school for aerospace engineering.
But, of course, smart guy.
Of course, naturally, as we all have to do. But he did eventually leave the field to pursue writing, and he obviously succeeded. Over his career, he's won several awards, including the Pirates Alley Faulkner Society's Gold Medal for Snow Angels and the Drew Hines Prize for In the Walled City. Now, to be honest with you, the only work of his, besides, of course, the ones we'll be covering in this episode, that I'm familiar with is Snow Angels. And that's only because of the David Gordon Green adaptation with Kate Beckinsale and Sam Rockwell. Dan, did you ever see that movie, or are you familiar with any of his work?
I'm familiar with it, kind of like you through David Gordon Green, but I've never actually seen it. But after kind of reading the description here, I'm like, I think I'm going to check that out this week. It sounds pretty interesting.
It's a movie I've never seen in its entirety, but it was on HBO, I think, a lot in the late 2000s. And I would always, I'd be ready to watch like The Wire or something like that, and it would be on right before that. It is bleak. I was pretty impressed with how bleak it got. I'll put it that way. So be prepared.
When the Wire becomes a palate cleanser, it's a dark story. But
you're really
But with David Gordon Green, I will say, I like his kind of mid 2000s, 2010s run, starting with Pineapple Express. But I really like Joe. I like Prince Avalanche. I think he does really well in that kind of mid tier small indie. As opposed to Halloween. Yeah, I've seen that. That's good. George Washington, his first movie was very good. I remember when that came out, being excited to see that.
I mean, based on everything you're saying too, the reason that we started the Halloweenies podcast was because we were so fascinated that David Gordon Green was doing a Halloween movie. If it was just some other person doing it, I don't think we would have been as interested. Ironically enough, I don't know if he wholly succeeded throughout all three films that he made, but that's a whole other podcast. So,
I got to give him his props though for Eastbound and Down, Vice Principals, and Righteous Gemstones, which are just so funny.
His TV work is great.
Yeah, it's just a weird contrast with Halloween. I don't fully even understand how that happened, but
same years later, I'm still trying to figure it out. So that's really the only thing of his Snow Angels that got adapted. But another story of his coincidentally just wrapped filming in late 2024 called A Prayer for the Dying, and that stars the great John C. Reilly and an actor named Johnny Flynn, whose older brother Jerome Flynn from Game of Thrones, as a matter of fact. He's also on the most recent Ripley adaptation on Netflix. He plays Dickie.
Oh, that was good.
That.
I actually thought that was good. I watched the movie just coincidentally like a year ago, which is awesome. The Philip Seymour Hoffman is so funny in that. He's such a villain. But I thought this adaptation was pretty interesting. Like I had low expectations, and I was like very stunned.
It looks amazing. I just haven't. Yeah. I haven't watched it yet. I've read the first. I actually started to read the books for the first time, the Patricia Highsmith Ripley books, and Mr. Ripley is an all-timer. And I read Ripley Underground, and that was pretty good too. I'm looking forward to figuring out where's this guy going. You know, what's the mystery here?
You're going to get caught, Ripley.
I think he's going to get caught one day. Maybe he'll be book 2. He's in prison the next 3 books, who knows, or book 3. Now, let's go back to, of course, the main man, Mr. King, Cy King, Uncle Stevie. As we know, based on many of his previous works, that King is a self-professed, quote, full-blown junkie, end quote, when it comes to baseball. And he says, quote, I always start to resent the evenings spent following baseball and to envy the people who can take it or just turn it off and read a good book. Myself, I've never been that way. I'm an addict, you see, and I'm a fan. And if there's a difference, I don't see it. We touched on this a little bit already, Dan, but what kind of a sports fan are you?
I'm a devoted fan, but I also have control of my emotions.
Right.
And I played a lot of sports growing up, and I remember like sometimes we would lose and kids on my team would cry. And I remember being like, how does it, you know, like I'm not going to put myself in a cast for 6 months to make that play or something. And so I tried to think I'm sensible, but when it comes to like playoffs, like you bet when it was coming down to the end, I was like standing and pacing around the house. Mm-hmm. The team I get the most passionate about is Tampa Bay Lightning. Hockey's my favorite sport.
I know, yeah.
And in the past 20 years, we've been to the Cup 5 times, won 3 of them. So I almost feel spoiled. So I try not to let myself act out. And it's interesting to see the devotion that they have, the faithful, as King calls them, that even though you feel like you know you're going to lose, like he says, like there's a bumper sticker that says like Job was the original Red Sox fan. And they're like, it's early enough in the season where that's still funny. And I thought that's a really good way to capture this kind of like pessimistic, you want to be optimistic, but you're almost like, you know, that fate and karma is going to crush you in the end.
You mentioned King's pessimism in the book. This is, I believe, aside from the confounding head down journal entry from Nightmares and Dreamscapes, this is the only time that the audience knows how a King writing is going to end versus King himself. So it's fun reading this book in that regard because we know that he's going to be at his sports fan happiest by the end of this. But as the season goes on, he becomes extraordinarily pessimistic and outright nasty towards the team at times, you know?
It's so interesting to me, like just being in the right place at the right time and how often that can just yield just amazing. I remember there was a documentary, this French film crew was documenting New York fire stations. And it just so happened they were there the day of 9/11. And of course, that changed the complete nature of the project. And I feel like with this too, you can tell in the beginning, like, sorry, what's the co-author's name? I just blanked on his name. Onan. But he kind of was like urging King. He's like, yeah, we should do this like diary project we talked about. They call it like a dual diary. And it seemed like King was like, I'm busy. He was kind of finishing Dark Tower, but he was like, I'll give it a go. And it's just, you see him get pulled in deeper and deeper as the season goes on. And then they end up winning the pennant. Spoiler. But like, what are the odds that the 1 year of, you know, what the drought was decades and decades, nearly 100 years. And then the 1 year he really sits down and is like, fine, I'm going to finally do this little project that I've been working on, that they actually go and win it all. That is just such insane timing.
Well, let's get into how this all started based on that, Flieger. I mean, because Onan and King, they had met earlier. They'd known each other for a little while. They'd been going to Red Sox games for years. And that's according to an interview that Onan gave to the indispensable Little Just Library, which has been around forever, basically as long as the internet's been around. He gave this interview back in 2004. He said, quote, Steve and I email and talk about the team all the time. And last year in August, when the team got hot, Steve decided we should keep a log of our reactions to the games. And this spring, when the season was about to start, my agent asked if I wanted to write a book about the Red Sox. Every year he asks me this, but this year I just finished a novel and finally had the time. I said I'd write it only if Steve could be my co-author. Steve was busy, but said he tried to contribute as much as he could. And once the season got going, his natural love for the game kicked in, and he couldn't stay away, much like you were talking about, Flieger. So for you, when you went into this book, were you expecting this to be more of a 50-50 contribution going in, or even maybe with King writing more than Onan?
I wasn't totally sure what to expect because the other collaborations I've read, like specifically the Chismar ones, like Caffrey and I interviewed Richard Chismar, and there was a similar thing here where in the first book they collaborated for the Button Box series, and then King didn't work on the second one.
Right.
But I asked
notably.
Yeah, but I asked, he even said, though, I was like, it's like the kid in the sandbox that's playing, and the other kid is like, I kind of want to get back in there. And I was like, was there a little bit of that? And he was like, oh, definitely. He's like, once King gets a taste for it, it's hard for him to walk away. So I do almost feel like Onan might have been leading the charge in the beginning, and then King just had more and more interest, especially as he talks about, he was finishing the Dark Tower series. He's editing it literally at games.
Yep.
Which we'll talk about, I'm sure, later on. But I could just see it like once he gets going, I think King just takes like such an interest in projects that he can't pull himself away.
I get it. I do like this fact that he said that Onan said that he would only write it if Stephen could be his co-author. Like the publishers were going to say, sorry, Stuart. Nope. No Stephen King. We do not want his name on the cover. Yeah. Do not have him involved, please.
We don't want him on the marketing. We want this book to sell.
We know, yeah. Very, very noble of them. Also of note, before Onan met King, Onan wrote a novel called Speed Queen, and the original title of that novel was Dear Stephen King. But King refused permission to publish it as such, and Onan told Liljas, quote, "Now that I've spent time with him, I see why. Everyone wants a piece of him. Yeah. So no, there are no hard feelings. He's a prince of a guy, very giving." I can get that. I get that. Because if you have Stephen King also on the title of a book, people will automatically assume that that's a Stephen King book too.
Yeah, and I even think that's like a kind of the main Yankee attitude is like a little suspicious of outsiders and strangers. Like friendly enough and polite, but not 100% trusting, especially from people that are out of town. It's like give a little side eye of like, what are your intentions, sir?
Yeah, and having visited you, and you also hear these stories that he is extremely generous in Maine, where he lives in Maine. But it's kind of this unspoken deal. Like if you see him and Tabitha walking around town, you don't bother them. Just let them live their lives in this small town that they live in,
Yeah.
Again, very generous, but also as private as they can possibly be, and especially King, when you're probably the most popular author of the last century plus, right?
Yeah. And I can really respect that too, especially at that
100%.
Level of fame and notoriety. I forget one of the recent books we read, but they even talk about like a family moves to Maine, lives there for 25 years. They're still seen as outsiders.
Yeah.
Right. It takes that long. It takes generations to really get close to these people. So I think even just for self-preservation and not spreading himself too thin, I totally understand and respect King's approach to this.
You don't want to lose a sense of home. And I think that he's done a really good job of keeping his feet in the ground, keeping his feet on the ground. Now, I mean, we learned that he donated a lot of money to get this incredible Little League baseball stadium built up in Bangor. And, he loves baseball. He's written about baseball a lot. I know you guys recently talked about Blockade Billy, which I think most people seem to hate in the 2010s Kingies episode that you were on. Head Down, which I mentioned, is very similar to Faithful. It's King breaking down every game. I think of Owen's Little League season. Mel Castle controversially loved this. I'll never forget. She loved this entry in that book. I myself, it wasn't like he was following, for instance, the Boston Red Sox about to win the World Series, so I didn't really take to as much.
Yeah, I think I was medium on it. But it's funny because the cover of this book reminds me a lot of it, with the catcher colliding with it's like he's putting his thumb in a guy's eye, I think, on the cover.
It's Veritek against A-Rod.
Yeah.
Who definitely didn't get busted for steroids and is still trying to get in the Hall of Fame.
Well, he contributed a lot. But it is interesting, too, that A-Rod, 2004, was his first year on the Yankees. Amongst all this, the substances from the DR that he was using. So there was just so much going on. Everything was converging into this crazy Yankees had a 101 win season, which is pretty insane.
They were great.
And the Sox were like 98 wins. It was such a perfect storm. And they
Alex,
talk about it.
I was say Alex Rodriguez was almost traded to the Red Sox. So that added a whole other wrinkle to the story, that he was that close to being a Red Sox instead of a Yankee. And that's the great thing about drama in baseball, if you really follow it well enough, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And of course, though, the girl who loved Tom Gordon. Tom Gordon figures quite a bit in Faithful. We'll get to that in a second. But what do you think it is about? I know you're a diehard baseball fan, but I know you follow enough. I mean, what is it about baseball that lends itself to King's mode of storytelling? Like, is it the Moneyball? You know, how can you not be romantic about baseball? You know,
I think, and I say this again as someone who played Little League growing up, baseball was definitely bigger in like the Northeast, and then I tried playing Little League more growing up, but soccer was like the bigger thing in Florida. Right. But my dad stayed loyal, and we would go to a lot of Toronto Blue Jays minor league games in Dunedin, Florida. There's, it was like $1 a ticket, so we would go to those constantly because it's just fun. It's. I've heard people compare baseball to watching a picnic, where momentarily crazy things happen and then it kind of settles back down. So now I mostly follow during playoffs. Like pretty much any sport, I will follow playoffs just because the bad teams have been eliminated. I want to see quality play, not scrubs. So even now, like I'll jump in on the playoffs, but I'm not nearly. I've spread myself too thin on other sports, I guess. And I think within this book, he does talk about that, how it is a slow game, and you can have a beer, you can have a hot dog,
you can proofread.
You can literally proofread. But like how he talks about, you have your iced tea during the late afternoon, and then you switch to a beer later in the game. And I think there's a romance to that I find very appealing. And this book really reinforced it. Like, I know me and you have been to Cubs games together,
of course,
and it makes me want to go to another one now because I'm like, after reading this book, I'm like thirsty for baseball.
I went back to my first game this year. It was quite cold on Sunday. It was a long, crazy game because baseball has been cut down considerably in a good way, I think, because of the time clock now. Baseball's I think they're half an hour shorter now than they used to be, which is great. But it's such I don't care what stadium you're at, even if you're at, the notorious Tropicana field, right? Like there's something beautiful about that giant field. Yeah. You know what I mean? It just looks great. And like when the sun's shining on it, it looks beautiful. Like you're at a park, you're at a baseball park. And it is something very calming and relaxing, and you can just kind of let the game flow over you. But then as you get kind of to those later innings, things do start to get a little more tense, especially if it's a close game. It kind of builds and builds and builds. It's like you're watching the equivalent of a slow burn movie when you're going to a baseball game a lot of the time, especially if it's a close game.
Yeah, and I know you've watched the Ken Burns documentary, Baseball, which is excellent. But he talks about how it's such a uniquely American sport, even though it originates from cricket. Mm-hmm. But it's like the only sport where the offense has less players on the field at the same time. Yeah. And the ball is put into play by the it just has like these very bizarre. It's not the traditional, like, you have to move this ball over the line while the other team tries this. It's something completely different. And I think the fact that the fields are not standardized. There's wild variations of the height of the wall, the Green Monster, for example, in Boston. But and we mentioned Tropicana, and like I've been to a bunch of Rays games growing up, and that was not really built for baseball. Yeah. And I think Hurricane Helene destroyed it, so the owners are probably happy that they get to build. But the Rays are now playing in like the Yankees spring training stadium, and it's kind of nice to see a small stadium. It reminds me of like Field of Dreams almost, where it's like it's very intimate, and I would love to see a game in that sort of setting.
It's the same thing that the Athletics are doing because their last season was in Oakland. Their owners are awful.
Yeah, the fans are not going to those games though because they feel betrayed.
It's like playing,
Sacramento now, I think.
It's like it's a pretty nice minor league stadium, I will say. But I watched the games the Cubs were playing there last week, and it is marketably smaller than any baseball stadium you will normally watch. It was kind of surreal. You feel like you're watching a spring training game, but this is where that professional baseball team's going to be playing for the next 3 years into oblivion.
And can I say, too, like, and with the nice thing about baseball, and it sucks now because WGN used to play all the Cubs games for free. Mm-hmm. And even as a kid growing up, like, we would watch WGN because it was a national channel. So I know
that's
a lot about...
That's why I love the team. That's how I got
That's why I love Bozo the Clown.
Yeah, that's true.
Throw the ball in the bucket. Brand new crisp $100 bill. I could use one right now. But I it kind of sucks that they got rid of that, but I used to like just having the game in the background. I could multitask, I could work, and you check in when something's happening, or like that, bases are loaded. Let's drop what we're doing and really lock in. And I think when you look at the stats of baseball, it's such an unusual sport. The fact that a triple play is rarer than a hole-in-one in golf. There's these weird sequences and obscure rules that if you really, I will learn something new every year that I watch the game, and I'm like, oh, I didn't fully comprehend that, or I didn't get that, or oh, that is so odd.
I saw the game I went to with my girlfriend, Caitlin, and she's not uber familiar with baseball, so we'll watch games. I'll try to explain things to her. I feel like that meme of the guy explaining something to somebody, but I was seeing things in that first inning that I'd never seen before. Like the opposing pitcher balked twice. At one point, he clearly got the yips and kind of just threw the ball on the ground in front of him, and runs were scoring. It was very surreal, but yeah, something strange seems to always happen in baseball. And despite all that, what's unique about baseball versus other sports is that football specifically is still like the national sport. It's become the new national pastime, right? Baseball, if you go to baseball games, and much of the time, with some exceptions, the stadiums are full. There are 20, 30, 40,000 people at these games. But the difference is that baseball versus football, especially basketball and even hockey, is that baseball's become so much more regional than it used to be. Like now, I can tell you all about the Chicago Cubs. I can tell you all about them. I can tell you who their starters are, their relievers, what their lineup is. I hardly know much about most other teams. And it wasn't like that. It was not always that way. I feel like I knew I could still tell you so much about so many other players and teams from the 80s and 90s and even 2000s, but it has become so regionalized, and that's kind of gone away.
And I think in the book, King talks about, and I thought it was interesting when he complains about having to play West Coast teams, because you think about it, like you're going to get jet lagged just changing time zones that up. But multiple times he's like grumbling about, oh, these damn West Coast teams. Like I hate when we have to play them.
Well,
and I think
even as a fan, because especially when we lived on the East Coast, if there was a West Coast trip, those games weren't starting until 10 o'clock at night. And we weren't
past midnight on school night. Yeah,
forget it. Those games would be over until 1:30 in the morning, and then you're screwed. You can't get to bed anyway if you did stay up.
And I think the thing that King though talks about that differentiates that. So my theory is like football is perfect for TV because you have like
better than
5 to 8 second play. You can watch the replay to fill in that time between plays, and then it starts again. It's actually easier to comprehend than live. Baseball, however, is more of like when I say like the picnic, but it's like there's like a festival atmosphere. The seventh inning stretch when everyone gets up to sing, and it's you can have a conversation. You don't have to really lock in quite the same. And I think what's interesting about Faithful is they consume the game in so many different ways, not just live, but when they can't go live, they'll watch it on TV, or they'll listen on the radio, or they'll just be talking to a stranger on the street and it'll be like, hey, did you see the score? I think Onan once, he has like a flat tire, and while he's waiting for the tow truck guy to come out, he recognizes, memorabilia of it, and he's like, oh yeah, did you hear what happened? Oh, so you're getting it. It's such a, you're playing so many games a year too, so it's kind of this like slow burn that's constantly going in the background. And I couldn't imagine necessarily, unless I was like in my car and I couldn't see a football game, I don't think I really often would just turn on and listen to the game on the radio. It just doesn't quite translate the way that baseball does.
I think also it just lends itself to conversation throughout the whole season versus if this was about him following the Celtics or even the Patriots at the time. It is a little bit more languid and spaced out. And like I said, it kind of washes over you. And this book does kind of just wash over you after a point, You're just kind of riding along with them at a certain point.
Can I tell you, and I should say for my closing remarks, but it seems appropriate now, but I would compare this book itself to at least how I feel during the baseball season. Because in the beginning, you're very excited. I'm like, this is my final Stephen King book. There's like an excitement. There's like an electricity. And then in the middle, it starts to drag a little bit. It gets a little repetitive, which is what happens in the baseball season, right? Yep. It starts to go a little bit slower.
It's the dog days of June.
Exactly. And you start to, it falls into like a grind. And that's like, you realize like, oh, they lost this game. But getting those like 3 road victories is going to pay off later on. And then
and there's 90 games left,
Right. So it seems insignificant, but then you get to the end of the book, the end of the season, you realize like those 1 or 2 points that you got on the road, like it's really coming down to it. And there's a tension that builds. And I think the fact that they mirrored it, whether on purpose or not, I'm sure they meant to, it really felt like a baseball season. And at the end, it has this major climax and everything. It's, a glorious finish. But yeah, in the middle of the book, there were times where I was like, okay, more scores. There's not
and
always.
King is just like, I'm going to be going on vacation for 5 days. I won't be able to write about this. He's kind of like, let's get back to being like August at that point.
But then you look back and you realize how important those middle sections were. And it's, when it was like no frills and not exciting, but they remain faithful.
But the best thing about it, way to incorporate the title again. That was really good. The great thing about it, though, is that this book would not have had that drama if the Red Sox had won a couple of those close games. Like they keep talking about how they kept losing to Baltimore, the Baltimore Orioles that year, and how pretty much the Orioles were bad against everybody else. But for some reason, they always got to the Red Sox, and that ultimately cost the Red Sox winning the Eastern Division, and they would have had home field against the Yankees. But then you wouldn't have had that great Game 4 moment in Boston in the 9th inning when they come back, and then it's on. That's the great thing about the drama that comes out of those losses, specifically for this project, that it's just so hard to imagine this book working as well as it does if they don't, one, beat the Yankees. I mean, honestly, even if they had just beat the Yankees, that would have been worth it. Getting over that hump would have been worth it. But then you add on to it this somewhat anticlimactic World Series, which was one of the worst World Series of all time, aside from the fact that the Red Sox won their first World Series in, 86 years, I think, or something like that.
Yeah.
It's just interesting how that worked out.
And it's because they talk about in the book, too, like the heartache of the 2003 season, which
brutal,
arguably could have been a better team than the 2004 team. But just how everyone felt like that was the point, like the high water mark, as Hunter S. Thompson calls it, where the wave receded. It felt like, we were that close, and now we have to give up. And I don't think they scored quite as much in 2004, but the team proved to be a better team. And the constant rivalry of like the Yankees is always in the background. They're checking scores. Onan talks about this too, like checking the score of other teams and how sometimes you have to force yourself not to do that. And I did just again, as someone who's a Tampa sports fan, King spends half his year, between Sarasota, and Maine. So he keeps an eye on the Rays, or the Devil Rays, as I call them. But it's fun too. Like as a kid, and even like the spring training for Boston is in Fort Myers, and I think Onan compares it to. So I'm from Hicksville, New York, in Long Island, and he's like, it basically is like a small sleepy town, like Hicksville with palm trees. And I'm just like, I love having these little I'm like that's like speaks to my life, and it's just fun when the geography kind of matches places that I was used to, and it's worked out great for King to live near where I grew up.
So the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette's John Freeman did the rare double interview with Onan and King, and that kind of got syndicated out in 2004. This was around the same time as the book's publication, and again, I'm not sure how the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette's John Freeman did not call out Onan for bailing on the Pirates when he went to college. Like, that seems pretty unforgivable to me. But again, this is not about that. It's not about my petty angers. But when discussing the differing perspectives on their favorite team, the Red Sox, King said, quote, "The difference between Stewart and I is that I was born and grew up in New England. I was born to this thing. Red Sox are in my blood. I have that sense of doom when things are going to..." It says expletive, but we're going to assume he says shit. "Where I come from, if you have a lump anywhere in your body, it's cancer, it's malignant, and you're going to die in 6 months. That's the way we look at the Red Sox, and Stewart comes from a different exorcist, right? Yeah, that's how you say it." End quote. So, how do you think this book was paced? Because Onan, if you read the book, and I'm sure listening to this episode, you've absolutely read the book, and we do appreciate it. But Onan's contributions to the book really come down to, he is breaking down full games, play by play. He's breaking down the minutia. And King is very much coming at it with emotionally charged reactions to these plays and games that are being described. What is your ultimate take on what each writer brought to the book, and do you think it was balanced well?
I think it was, and I think it's a tradition in sports where you have like the color commentator, and then you have kind of the numbers guy.
Right.
And I think that's a great dynamic when it works out, because you gotta, you need your carrots and you need your cake. And if you can find the right balance, which I think they did in this book, it makes for a better, you understand things from Onan. I keep saying Onan. But then King gets to come in and kind of make like a fun little pithy quote. And I think that's something that I always, whenever we quote passages from King's book, I tend to steer away from the paragraphs. I like these little like Yankee, I call them like a Yankee fortune cookie of just like this little bit of like old fashioned wisdom. And I think like they talk about life getting in the way of baseball. And I think that's kind of the major thesis of this book is like there's so much going on. They talk about family, they talk about friends, they talk about their careers. But at the end of the day, they really just want to be sitting there in the zone watching the game. And I think that's King. There's a few moments throughout the book where they just like he nails it with that. And I think it balances really well to, again, some of the wonkier stat sheet information.
Right. I mean, there are some genuinely really good, sweet passages, which I've read a couple, and we'll be reading, I'm sure, a little bit more as we go on. Because King can't help himself either. He is absolutely romantic about this game. This is his first sports love. And I think it's still
romance is a perfect word for it. It's such a good word for it.
I think another analogy I would bring to that, in addition to like the color commentator and the main announcer, is Onan to me is the starting pitcher, and then King comes in there as like the reliever.
I would call him the knuckleball pitcher.
Yeah, Tim Wakefield, the Tim Wakefield of this book, as it were. But yeah, I just feel like he closes off a lot of those entries, a lot of those games, a lot of those playoff series so well because he kind of sneaks in there, like you said, and just like those little quick bites, and then bam, he nails it like in the paragraph, and then we're moving on.
Yeah,
but
that's why
I think it's balanced well.
When I compared it to a season, but that's a really good analogy as well, the pitcher thing. I didn't even think of that. And you wonder how much they consciously were trying to do it.
Right.
And how much it was just kind of washing over them that even their approach was going to resemble the way a team, closes out. For people who don't follow sports, like the closer is the pitcher that you kind of put in, when you take your starter out, but you still need to finish the game. You want to give him rest, but you have a guy that can throw like 100 miles an hour for 2 to 3 innings and just come in there and finish the game out.
And essentially close it out. Yeah, exactly. Well, Faithful was released on December 2nd, 2004. And, I did find some verifiable reviews courtesy of a press release, and you won't believe it. They're all positive. I'll read a couple here. Faithful isn't just about the Red Sox. It's also about family, friendship, and what it truly means to be a baseball fan and to be, well, faithful. Come hell or high water, this season was full of priceless moments, and King and Onan catch nearly all of them in amber. And that comes courtesy of Frank Mosher of, believe it or not, the Boston Globe. If you can believe that. You have this next quote from the USA Today, Dan?
Sure. King and Onan are the kind of fans who make for great baseball companions. Knowledgeable, opinionated, funny, and irreverent.
I've always said that about the two of us. Those are going to be the reviews on iTunes. Wow, what an episode. Yeah. Knowledgeable, opinionated, funny, and irreverent.
Very good looking. And this is from Bob Misensheimer from USA Today.
And Kyle Smith of the highly respectable People magazine said, a sweet romance. The details are priceless. And this is maybe my favorite one. This is the best quote, and because it's from probably the best writer. This is from the great writer Dennis Lehane, novelist, TV writer as well, from Entertainment Weekly at the time. Dan, you want to read that one?
Sure. Faithful is ultimately a quasi-religious book about what all great religions should be founded upon. Love, in all its blindness and terror and euphoria and purity and, yes, addiction.
Yeah, that says it all right there, Mr.
And can I mention with the Entertainment Weekly, so we do the King of Pops, or King of the Pops series, which I've been on a few of those. I think you have as well.
Yeah.
And it is funny because you can see, and it just speaks to like what's happening in baseball. He's talking to other people about different things and how he won't be able to watch Deadwood if this game goes too late. Right. Or, in Entertainment Weekly, like you can see the same stuff that he was reviewing then is just constantly on his mind. There's a few shows that he mentioned. I made a list of some of them. But yeah, he talks about like he mentions The Sopranos, he mentions Deadwood, he mentions other HBO shows, and I don't know, was Lost out? No, Lost wouldn't have been out. Wait, I think Lost had not come out yet. That might have been like 2005 or 6.
That might have been the end of that season. It might have shown up in 2004, maybe. I think I can't remember now. God, it was on for 6 seasons.
Yeah, I think
maybe it was 2003. Maybe it had been on for a year. I'm not. I don't know. It's funny though because there's so many times where Onan's talking about having to tape certain episodes and whatnot. Actually, it's funny. He actually at one point mentions that instead of watching the newest episode of Kingdom Hospital, although he assures King that he's taped it, he chooses The Apprentice instead.
Yeah.
Who knew?
Who could have thought?
We were so innocent. God,
for a better show. Well, at least at the time it was. He does mention. He says, "Save me, Jeebus," which is a Simpsons quote, which I thought was like a funny little thing to add in there.
For the real ones, for the real heads. Now, I did want some reactions because we talked about this, for people who, I want some reactions for people who are more or less not familiar with baseball. And what better place to look than the United Kingdom? Because writer Sean O'Hagan, who interviewed Nick Cave for a really great book called Faith, Hope, and Carnage. Have you read that?
No, but I was in the research when I saw that. I was like, oh, that makes me intrigued. I'm a big Nick Cave fan.
Yeah, you got to read it. You'll love it.
Me and Heather saw him live at South by Southwest, and it was awesome. Some guy was filming in the front row, and he just grabbed the phone and chucked it.
Yeah, I've seen photos of him after the obligatory 3 songs for the photographers, just kind of wave them away. But he wrote a piece on Faithful for The Observer back in 2005, and let's read some quotes from this. The first one: "The notions of surrender and transcendence, of duty and devotion underpin this chronicle of a shared sporting obsession." You want to read this next one, Dan?
Sure. For all its nail-biting real-life drama, Faithful is yet another testament to the irrational attraction of blind fandom. King is the more illuminating, in part because he is a more accomplished writer, gifted in his powers of description and scene setting, and in part because he is a die-hard Sox fan, born and bred.
Do you want to read this next part with an Irish accent? Because you can legally do that.
Sure. On the downside, the book is filled with all kinds of facts and figures. The baseball, cricket, fans lap up and can reel off at will. But to baffle the rest of us, in places too, pardon me, in places too, the insider's jargon is so impenetrable it could be almost written in another language.
That's perfect. Perfect. So on that note, can you see yourself recommending this to somebody who isn't interested in baseball, let alone sports in general?
I think you would have to be a King fan. I think this would be a little hard to take if you didn't have any interest in that or King. Sure. But if, like us, I think me and you are completionists with most media. We in our lives, there's like a sickness of like, well, I've gone this far, I might as well keep going. But I was excited to read this, and I think if you are into King but not sports, I would definitely recommend this, because I think it's the same with like On Writing. It's not just a book about writing; it gives you a window into King as a person, and I find him like infinitely fascinating. And like I enjoy hearing his takes, whether I agree with them or I don't. I think he's got a really good way, just like that previous review says, that he's got such a good power of description within his voice. And I would definitely encourage people who are not into baseball to read this, even if like us, they saved it for the end. I would say don't save it for the end. I would recommend reading it, and especially it's exciting now that baseball season has just kicked off.
100%.
You could just knock off a chapter every now and then.
Conversely, I would actually definitely recommend this book to somebody who isn't into Stephen King, because it's still written very well. It goes beyond, and they talk about this even in the book a couple times. They question whether or not they should have had, I think they mentioned the Boston Globe's Dan O'Shaughnessy. Like, why wasn't he writing this book with them? Because it does come across, I should say, as much more of a fan take, but they're naked about that. They're not trying to pretend it's anything other than a fan experience on it. And I think that a lot of sports fans who, again, don't care about King would still enjoy this book, specifically if you're a baseballer.
Yeah.
Red Sox
I think
fan,
with Onan too, like whether you call it like split allegiance, like I could totally see though, like we said earlier, like I didn't get into basketball until much later in life. It just wasn't something that my household, my parents didn't follow it. But when I did get into it, I got really into it. So even him being in Boston and kind of being around that, not to take away from Pittsburgh's fandom, but I think the Boston tradition of the whole city gets into this. I can see how that's attractive. And I think it's good that he has a slightly outsider point of view as compared to King, who, again, born and bred into it. Because there's passages when like the Nomar controversies are coming up and his grandkids are like, oh, I guess I have to switch who I root for. And you can just see King is like devastated by this.
I was so excited as a Cubs fan when that happened. The Cubs, much like the Red Sox the year before, they were only a few outs away from going to the World Series before the infamous, people would call it the Bartman game, but the team itself absolutely choked. It was not that fan's fault. I need to say that.
Because that wasn't the final game, right?
It wasn't even the final game. In the final game, they took the lead and blew that too. It just wasn't time. You know what I mean? But in 2004, they got Nomar, and again, here we go. And then they absolutely blew the last week of the season. Didn't even make the playoffs, which King and Onan briefly talk about mercifully. I was afraid to have to relive that in this book. You mentioned something about your family and kind of getting it, you weren't really into basketball because it wasn't really something in the house. And I think sports specifically versus even music or films or books, it's such a passed down experience. You know what I mean? Like you get like the passion that your family has for a certain team passed down to you versus, oh, somebody loves Steven Spielberg. It's just not going to hit the same. Like there's something ingrained in you if you're like a really diehard sports fan that's going to stick with you and rubs off a lot of the time.
And I think also the fact that film, in a way, gets locked into a place and time, right?
Mm-hmm.
I remember watching this when I was a kid, and you can do that with sports too. I remember growing up and watching this game as a kid, but the fact that it keeps marching along and that there's more experiences to be had that maybe your ancestors didn't have, but they can share these new moments with you. I was watching Boston fans react and Cubs fans react to the World Series, and it's great when you see this 95-year-old grandpa just weeping, and he has like a little 2-year-old great-grandchild on his knee, and it's like you really are passing on this culture that it's a very special thing. Like I love, like I've gotten some people into sports with me, like people I've dated, and it's fun to see them be like, oh, this is pretty exciting. And it's a very special thing to share with another person.
Yeah, there's nothing more thrilling to me, and I mean this sincerely, than when my girlfriend's like, oh, that's the rookie, or she'll name check a random player. I'll be like, oh, my heart is singing right now.
It's like, Hook, you're doing it, Peter. You're doing it.
I've thought about this a lot, especially as the years have gone on. It's so hard to explain why any sport can mean so much to us, because we know at the end of the day, it is a game that people are playing. You know what I mean? This isn't like a war is coming to an end or some great law is passed, but we still take it so personal. I don't think there's ever a definitive answer. It's almost like you're asking somebody like, what define love? Can you really, really do it? I can't describe fandom. I can't, but I just know that if you have it, it feels good, especially when that team that you root for and are passionate about succeeds. It just feels so good. Like it's paid off. Like being faithful has paid off.
Yeah. And I love when people are faithful to the game. So just recently in hockey, this player Ovechkin passed what was considered like an unbreakable record by Wayne Gretzky. And Gretzky gave a really gracious speech where he was like, this is good for the game.
Right.
Like this is going to help bring more attention. And that's what you should, you think of athletes like they're always like the top 1% of every team they've played on since they were 6 years old. Mm-hmm. And eventually it gets to the point where your body breaks down and you have the skills, but your body is not able to physically keep up. And it's so tragic. Like most athletes have bad knees by the time they're near their 40s. It's just the wear and tear. And throughout the series, I mean, you see like the Kurt Schilling literal ripping through stitches in his ankle, literally creating a red sock, which is so poetic. But seeing like an athlete step away, maybe when they don't want to, and the heartbreak just because they realize like you get paid all this money to play what is essentially a child's game. So I do appreciate when an athlete is humble about that, and like when they do charity or they make a wish fountain versus like some of these athletes who are just kind of like become divas about it.
Right.
And I feel like there's a mix of that in every sport, but some of the people that are considered the greatest in baseball usually avoid that, which is nice.
What I do find fascinating though with athletes is that with very few exceptions, if they are not literally physically incapable of playing, they never leave on time. They never retire when they're not as good as they used to be, because the thing is, the most frustrating thing is for an athlete, as I know, when you get older, you do become more intelligent in regards to the game that you're playing. It's just that your body is not growing with your brain anymore. It's going the opposite way. So that's the frustration, and that's why they never know when to truly hang it up.
Yeah, and then they talk about it in the book a little bit too, but that is the thing. When you go, especially when you're a younger person, whether you're male or female or what else, you take more risk when you're younger that you realize as you get older are not worth, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. But also you start to see the term they use a lot is the game slowing down. Mm-hmm. You don't feel like you're in much of you can assess information a lot quicker, and it gives you more of a peace in the sport. And I think that a few of the players, especially the ones that are nearing like the end, like they talk about Kurt Schilling, but how they wish he was younger now, like because they realize like we're not going to have him for that many years following this, and there's a frustration. So that's like when people make a big deal about like a Tom Brady or someone playing into their 40s. It's just the human body is not supposed to do that. And it's not to say that he's not tenacious, but it's also a series of luck. You know, the fact that you didn't snap your leg in two on this play, or, you know, in any sport, they have non-contact injuries where a guy will just pull a hamstring while running or jogging. And even, you know, that's a big thing in this book. The number of injuries that start piling up and you're getting to the postseason. And it creates a lot of stress for the fans. Even though they're not experiencing the pain directly, they still feel it psychically.
Yeah, it's because it's their, in this case, it's their guys. So it's like a by proxy thing, you know. It's so complicated to explain. But can you read this last? Let's get to this last quote that O'Hagan gives about King's grandson. This is such a great moment of the.
I'll drop
of
the
book.
accent out of respect.
Yeah, out of deference.
One of the best glimpses of the exaggerated reality of fandom in the book comes from King's grandson, who was woken up late at a Friday night by his father so he could witness the historic moment when the Red Sox won the World Series on television. When it happened, the boy asked, "Is this just a dream, or are we living real life?" A sentiment all true fans will recognize and identify with. The long-lost, longed-for sense of wonder that sport, at its most epic and heroic, briefly awakens in us. The feeling of truly being alive.
And that really sums it up great. And that's coming from somebody who, again, has a passing familiarity with baseball, but he relates it to sports in general and just life in general. When you get that euphoric feeling that's always fleeting, but man, it feels so good. And it's safe. There's a safety in it.
At the safe at home. Safe. The little kid balked. He's out. But automatic walk. No, but I think at the end, Onan even talks about how when the season is done, it's hard to center yourself and be mindful. And he's already looking at how to get tickets for the next season. And he's like, well, now the tickets are going to be more expensive. And he even has to catch himself and be like, just enjoy this moment.
Right.
Like you'll have time to worry about it in the future. And when you read this book, you see these guys put themselves through the ringer of emotions that to the point where even when they win, it's hard to, you know, be in that moment. So I think the little kid saying like, is this real life or a dream, is just such a reminder of like, no, this is real life. Like this, it feels like a dream, but it's real.
I feel like the agony of defeat comes from sports to me. Like when things are down, it's the end of the world. And when things are up, it just seems like it's going to be gone in 2 seconds and you're going to be feeling like shit again. You know, it's so hard to hold on to that. But
and especially at such
in this book,
the high level, it's not that you love to win, it's that you hate to lose.
Right.
And that's what differentiates like professional athletes. It's, oh, I didn't win this one, I'll get them next time. It's like, no, this is the end of the world. I lost it, you know. And that's why, like, so they always do like these little charity events where they'll have like athletes and celebrities drive like race cars. And they're not professional drivers on either end. But when you look at the finishing, the athletes tend to finish in the top 5 positions. What is it about that? They're not better drivers, but it's that competitive spirit that if you're eating a bowl of cereal next to them, they're going to want to finish it first. You know, every locker room has a ping pong table in it, and these guys are betting money constantly. It's a different mindset that those guys have. And it's very, I mean, it's, you know, Mamba mentality kind of thing. It's very...
Yeah. It's not like there's something off with those other people. It's just that there's something additionally on with that small percentage, and that's what makes the difference between somebody who makes it and hits the highs and somebody who's just kind of known for being great in one region. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that's why we watch sports, to see if we can watch these people accomplish the impossible, you know? So this is such a loose episode. I just wanted to go into this, we'll call it extra innings. Just a couple things I noted. I didn't know if you had any reaction to Fleeger, but there's some insensitive writing going on. And keep in mind, this is in 2004. We were a little bit more flippant with some of our words and adjectives. At one point, I think Onan makes a reference to I think a Japanese player, and recommends that the Red Sox manager seeks out Finding Nomo instead of Finding Nemo, another Japanese baseball player. King describes future Hall of Famer CC Sabathia as, quote, the pimpest pitcher in the American League. Thought that was interesting.
Yeah,
that's just a couple
I'd say
examples.
The late 90s, early 2000s, like pimp kind of became a vogue
Pimp my
word
ride,
to use.
you
Yeah,
know?
pimps are not good people. They're sex traffickers.
Exactly.
But it became, in the parlance of the times, like it was the word that would get used. But it's so funny that it's to the point where guy, I'm assuming it was probably, 60s at the time, late 50s, is using pimpest. That's when you know the word is no longer cool.
And wouldn't it be pimpiest if we want to get really specific about it? It's bad grammar, bad writing.
It's a weird adjective. I'm not exactly sure how to break that down.
Let me check Google AI for the definitive answer. It is funny, though. Again, we know what's about to happen in this book, but they are laying into then Red Sox manager Terry Francona, who's in his first year managing the team. They call him a dork. They refer to him as the coma. In an email exchange, they compare him to Danny from The Shining when he's shaking. It's funny because Francona did go on to win 3 World Series with the team, and that's the second most managerial wins in Boston Red Sox history. Now, this is a free-flowing episode, but don't worry, folks, because there's still some King's Dominion.
There's another world out there. I know there is.
Dan, I'm not sure if you clocked any of these, but I'll run down a bunch of these that I found to be pretty interesting. So at one point, King misses a Red Sox loss on TV, and he writes, quote, "I'll wait for the highlights, lowlights, deadlights," end quote. I thought that was rather amusing.
Yeah.
You want to take this next one?
Sure. King emails Anon that while he's proofreading the final Dark Tower novel, Mushmouth over here, Dark Tower novel at the end of the game, a foul ball missed his nose by less than an inch. What if he randomly died while literally trying to finish the Dark Tower at a baseball game after miraculously recovering from a car accident that nearly ended his life years earlier?
I thought about it. That would have been wild.
As a Towerhead, I like that he incorporates the van as almost like this. Some darker force was trying to stop him from finishing his work, and the fact that a baseball nearly took him out is such an interesting thing, and it ties to earlier because like there's a lot of like superstitions and omens in sports, and especially like Boston sports, and they talk about the guy that lived in Babe Ruth's old house, who supposedly there was a curse on the team. Once they traded Babe Ruth from the Red Sox to Yankees, they never won a World Series again. Yep. But he got hit in the mouth and like lost teeth, and they're like, does that mean the curse is broken?
Maybe it was because they did win the World Series. Who knows?
Additionally, too, King pitches. He's pitched 2 opening pitches by the time this was written, and they lost both of those games. And people are like, is this horror hound putting a curse on the team?
Well, that was my other King's Dominion too there. And he said he was hesitant to throw the first pitch for this game. By the way, it was to be filmed for Fever Pitch with the great Jimmy Fallon. Air quotes with the great.
America's bad boy.
Real groundbreaking comedian. But he said that when he did throw out the first pitch of the game in 90, I guess it was 2000? Anyway, the year he got hit. I think it was 99 or 2000. I can't believe I'm blanking on this. But anyway, Tom Gordon got injured that game. The great Tom Gordon. And a month later, King got hit by that van. So he does really believe in jinxes. He was that hesitant about doing it. Another coincidence here, I felt, well, we mentioned he was doing press for a lot of stuff at the time when he was writing Faithful. And he was doing press for Song of Susanna during the season. And he also mentions exploring possibilities for a musical play with John Mellencamp that would go on to become Ghost Brothers of Darkland County. And that's something that we are also covering on the pod this year, as a matter of fact. So keep an eye out, or should I say an ear out, for that episode. We talked about the Kingdom Hospital and The Apprentice. King writes about a Yankees loss in a footnote, though. And he says that the loser of the game, quote, "I'm sorry to say, happened to be ex-Red Sox closer Tom Gordon, the star of a book I wrote. And in The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon, Flash will be the Red Sox closer forever. Sorry, Mr. Steinbrenner, the owner of the Yankees, but there's not a thing you can do about that one." Nice. You want to read this next one?
Yeah, sure. Onan on Tim Wakefield. I hate to sound like Annie Wilkes here, but I've got to be Wake's biggest fan.
Oh, Onan's
one of his biggest fans.
He was hoping King would read that. I can't remember if that was an email exchange or just one of the entries, but I thought that was rather amusing. I'll close it on this. On the number of games the Red Sox and Yankees played against each other in the 2004 regular season, Red Sox player Trot Nixon lamented that, quote, 19 is too many. So
I have a couple more actually that I found.
Go, please, go.
While we were
go
getting
for
ready. Well, they mentioned the game on September 19th. There's like an emphasis put on there. But at one point they say, "Baby, can you dig your Rangers?"
I missed that.
Baby, Can You Dig Your Man, of course.
Are they Righteous Rangers, I wonder? That's the real
Righteous
question.
team. And they also, King at one point says the great wheel of Ka turns. And the final one that I thought was kind of the intro. What do you call it when they, you quote someone in the opening, not the prologue necessarily, but he quotes Screaming Jay Hawkins. In the novel Christine, the cat is named Screaming Jay Hawkins.
Nice. Wow.
And it's the
there we go. That's what we're talking about.
It's the I put a curse on you, right? Or I put a spell on you.
I put a spell on you. Yeah.
I put a spell on you.
I put a spell on you. Sounds like we're going to be talking about Hocus Pocus over here. Although, you know who wrote Hocus Pocus, just to take it all back? Mick Garris, who directed The Stand and every other Stephen King adaptation.
I was going to say Focus by the Swedish band who wrote Hocus Pocus, Focus.
Okay, well, before we get to Facing the Crowd, Dan, let's do the old Pennywise Clown Noses, Bright Reddit, of course. What would you give Faithful?
Like I said, the way that it mirrored an actual baseball season and pulled me in, and it makes me want to watch baseball. Mm-hmm. It didn't turn me away from it. It actually kind of made me nostalgic for the times where I would go and watch games, or just, even as a Fairweather fan, just kind of pay attention to what's going on. I'm hoping this year I will do that more rather than just kind of tune in during the playoffs. I thought this was like a really interesting writing exercise. You never know how it's going to go when two people collaborate, right? But I think here it came together. Home run. I'm going to say 4 bright red Pennywise Clown Noses.
I'm with you too. I will give it 4 bright red Pennywise Clown Noses. As a matter of fact, after the first day of reading this, I was inspired, and I said, "Okay, I'm going to do this." So I've started on the Patreon page. I'm doing the same thing. I'm writing about the Cubs every game this entire season.
Nice.
So if you've got Patreon, make sure you go to the actual page, patreon.com/The Barons, and you'll find every day I've got a journal entry in there. It's called Faithful 2, TOO. It wrote itself, folks. And this book, just the first page, I just got so inspired. I was just right back in the swing of things, and no pun intended. And just got me really jazzed up for baseball again this season. I mean, I love baseball, but it's just kind of adding another thing to it, another layer to it. And, hopefully the Cubs have a nice season. It's been a few years. But anyway, having said all that, really well written. I love the fact that Onan dives really deep into it, while, like I said, King kind of closes it out in his classic prose. They're both extremely passionate about baseball. You can't fake it. And they definitely don't read as though they're faking it in this too. And again, I don't know. I think that if you don't know the ins and outs of baseball, but you can look at it as the story of an underdog and the effect it has on somebody that, honestly, that you've loved and respected, and like what you see what it's doing to him, good and bad. I think that it's able to captivate a reader in that respect. And I say this, of course, as somebody who does not remember a time that they did not love sports, but I think it'll still work on you. And so, I'll give this a bright red Pennywise Clown Nose rating of 4 out of 5 bright red Pennywise Clown Noses. So don't hit that stop button. Don't go to your next podcast, because we do have another short story to talk about, A Face in the Crowd. This time credited to not Stuart Onan and Stephen King, but Stephen King and Stuart Onan. Now, this is from the great Bev. It's from the great Bev Vincent's website. Oh my God, you said it, brother. Flieger, do you want to read about this?
Yeah, I'll take the first half.
Yeah,
because it's a pretty big chunk. So Bev Vincent wrote in his May 20th, 2004 entry in Faithful. King writes that he had a great idea for a story about a guy who watches a lot of baseball on TV, perhaps because he's a shut-in or an invalid. One night, he sees his best friend from childhood who was killed in a car crash sitting behind home plate. The friend still looks like he's 10. From that night on, the protagonist sees the kid at every game, at different stadiums, and each night there are more dead friends and relatives sitting around him. I think it's a very nasty little idea, King says. This is a rare instance where we know the exact moment when King had an idea for a story.
True.
You want to take the other half?
Yeah. However, 8 years later, he was still grappling with it. At a February 2012 appearance at the Savannah Book Festival, he repeated the idea and offered it to the audience. "You guys write it," he said. "I can sort of smell old TV dinners in his house. There's all this crap on the counters because nobody really likes this guy. Here's what's interesting to me. There are all these people behind the guy who's batting, the people in the audience. What if this guy started to see all those people in his life that are now dead in the stands at all these different baseball games? Would there be a story in that? Well, I can't figure it out. You figure it out." Well, and the audience that night was Stuart Onan, King's faithful co-author. Apparently, their mutual love for baseball and writing fired up their creative juices because they collaborated to develop and finish the story a few months later. A Face in the Crowd was released on August 21st as an ebook and an audiobook read by Craig Wasson. Now, Craig Wasson, Flieger, has done audiobooks for a number of King books. Do you know that? Does that name ring a bell to you?
I've done a number of the audiobooks. I can't on the top of my head name it, but I'm sure I have read them. Can you name some of those?
Well, I'm just saying, do you recognize the name Craig Wasson?
Is he in Cujo?
No. He's in Body Double. Brian De Palma's Body Double. And he's the psychologist in A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3.
Oh, he's in The
Dream
Outsider
Warriors.
too. Okay.
Yeah. He's been in a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, Nightmare on Elm Street. Okay, yeah.
So
It took me. He has that kind of vaguely 70s look.
Oh, 100%.
White guy in 1970s that kind of blends in with the feathered hair and everything.
I think he was, when I was growing up, I thought he was like 45 in Body Double and Dream Warriors. I think he was like 31. You know, it's one of those faces. Yeah. God bless him. It's the 80s. So here's the official synopsis that bore out of that description. And it is as follows. Dean Evers, an elderly widower, sits in front of the television with nothing better to do and wastes his leftover evenings watching baseball. It's Rays Mariners, and David Price is breezing through the lineup. Suddenly, in a seat a few rows up beyond the batter, Evers sees the face of someone from decades past, someone who shouldn't be at the ballgame, somebody who shouldn't be on the planet. And so begins a parade of people from Evers' past, all of them occupying that seat behind home plate, until one day, Dean Evers sees someone even eerier. Pretty faithful to that initial description. So, Flieger, just what did you make of A Face in the Crowd?
So I did not reread it. I read it years ago. And I thought I had a better grasp on it, but I guess I failed in the homework assignment. I remember kind of enjoying it. I remember at the time thinking there were some similarities to, They Got a Hell of a Band.
Oh, yeah.
That kind of thing where they're spotting like dead rock stars.
Mm-hmm.
But it didn't really leave an impression. Even when we're talking about some of these other ebooks that are on the dossier, those stick out more to me. I should have gone back and reread this, but I was remaining faithful to the main subject matter, I guess. Faithful,
as it were. I think, Red Screen ends up in You Like It Darker, Fen. I've read that one as well. Obviously, You Are You Are, whatever you want to call it, is great. But
yeah, I like that book too. Like a lot of people kind of shit on that one, but I think that's kind of a fun exercise in writing for Amazon.
It's this story for me. I think, I don't know if psychologically, at first I thought it was 80 pages. So I was kind of bracing myself. I was making sure I read this on time and faithful on time. I didn't notice that 40 of those pages were like previews of The Talisman and something else for some reason. So it was a nice quick 40-page read. I'll break it down because I read it more recently, obviously. But I like the fact in this book that the main character is presented as this grieving widower who is at his wife's side. They're still playing tennis together. She has this stroke. He takes care of her and she dies. So you automatically have sympathy for this character. And I do love how that sympathy slowly unravels at like a good pace for 40 pages. And it's not even, we see like this kid he and his friends bullied. We ultimately see his wife and this woman he had an affair with. But it's not like the youthful bullying that hits hard. It's the little things, like there's the blackmail. We discover he's blackmailing somebody's infidelity going on that we didn't think was going to be happening. But at the end, I'm not sure if this is Onan or King. It probably was King, who can be much more sympathetic, especially now that I know the ending of Snow Angels and what Onan is capable of. And then reading this, despite it all, I think Dave, the character, is kind of doomed, but he's still human. Like, he calls his son one last time before he's permanently disconnected. It's a neat little story. It just hums along. It's a really fun conceit. It kind of reminds me, you remember when Smile was being marketed on TV and there were people sitting behind home plate at random baseball games just smiling at the camera? Like, that was great promo.
Yeah, that was really smart.
Years after this, but it reminded me of that sensation of just watching a baseball game, like you said, letting the game just kind of happens, like you're at a picnic, and then something is slightly off, like a cloud has come over that picnic, and there's just something there that shouldn't be there. It's a really fun idea, and they get into the whole minutia of certain players at the time. They talk about Felix Hernandez. They even talk about David Price in that intro. But again, it's an example of two guys who are writing about what they know, and that is horror, death, and of course baseball. I would give it, it's a nice right down the middle. It's a fastball down the middle. I give it 3. I'm going to break my own code here. I'm not going to give it a 3 or 3.5. I'll give it a 3.25 bright red Pennywise clown noses. Recommended. I read it in one sitting. It's really short. It's got a little mean streak to it at the very end. But I have to ask you this question, Dan. What King property has a darker afterlife? Would you say Revival or An Eternity at Tropicana Field? And somebody who's a Rays fan, but at that specific stadium, though.
Yeah, they're like a secondary team. Because I remember even when they were in the playoffs, you were giving me shit because I was rooting for them. You're like, that's not your team. And I'm like, yeah, I know. But I will say, having been lucky that one of my neighbors had like luxury box seats, so I've gotten to go to Rays games with like unlimited food, which is quite an experience.
Nice.
Versus Revival, what afterlife would I prefer there? It's a tough one, but tie goes to the runner. I'm going to say Tropicana Field is where I'd rather spend my time.
Honestly, all joking aside, I'm right there with you. I'll bring the hot dogs. You bring the beer, as it were.
I'll bring the Cracker Jacks.
Well, as we said at the beginning of this episode, folks, we're all caught up. If you want to listen to any coverage of any published Stephen King book, if it's not on our main feed right now, it's on the Patreon, and eventually it will be laid out there on our main feed as well as the year goes on, month by month. And we're going to continue on with this ride. I'm kind of speechless. I don't even know what to say. It's my God, it's 8 years in the making. But do you have anything else you want to add real quick here before we get into our plugs?
No, I think just like the end of the season, let's just kind of bask in the mindfulness of knowing we accomplished something rather than think too far ahead or too far back. Good job, man. I'm proud of you. Like we did
too.
it. We caught up. I think Jen and Caffrey are the only other ones that have read everything.
Yeah. And obviously all the others who have been on this journey for 8 years, specifically, obviously, Mike and Randall, who have been heading up so many episodes over the last 8 years. I mean, this is truly a great accomplishment, and I'm so happy that people have been listening for all these years. It is kind of mind blowing because we listen to podcasts for years. It's so hard to break through it all, and the fact that we were actually able to do it, and then for a lot of us, like, spread our wings to other pods too, has been very rewarding. We're very grateful for that, and
thanks to the fans.
Again, thanks to the fans, and of course, I say we're caught up now, but I think next month, I believe, is Never Flinch, another Stephen King novel. So we'll be right back in the swing of things with another Holly Gibney novel.
Plenty of subject matter to go over, and
I think so too.
I have theories about him having so much unpublished stuff that's going to eventually come out. So
I'll be very curious about that. But
stay tuned.
Let's give some plugs here for the rest of April here on the Losers Club pod. We've got a new feature called The Stacks, which is available, and that's going to be a real constant episode, if not monthly, bi-monthly, where we're going to be talking about what we're reading, what we're watching, what we're experiencing in pop culture that doesn't necessarily have something to do directly with Stephen King, but we're trying to concentrate on the genre when it comes to those episodes. Our first episode on that is out now. We're going to be doing a long watch episode on Louis Teague's Cat's Eye, which is turning 40 years old. I think it is 40 years old this year or maybe last year, but regardless, it turned 40 years old. We're doing a long episode on that. And also, I mentioned earlier, it's available on the Patreon, but it's going to be available on the main feed soon. If It Bleeds, our coverage that we did a few years ago, will be on the main feed for the very first time. Also in the Barrens, on this very Patreon, we're doing Oops All Tangents episode on everybody's favorite, Nepo babies. And maybe more importantly, Fleeger, I was shocked when I learned about this. Julia and Dan Caffrey,
yes,
neither of them have watched The Dark Tower, but they are going to finally watch The Dark Tower and talk about it with you on The Dark Tower Detour. Are you excited about revisiting that movie?
It was so funny. Well, it's funny because you mentioned Cat's Eye. I think I was a virgin for that. I think I watched that with you and Mac for the first time.
You're right.
We did a watch along. Right. So yeah, it's come up a few times, and people have very mixed feelings, I should say, about The Dark Tower. Film series, that is.
Yes.
But Caffrey had never seen it. And I was just like, we got to just have you watch it, and Dan's so strange. Like, he'll have a more optimistic outlook on properties that maybe some of us don't enjoy as much.
True.
So who knows what's going to happen? But I wanted to bring Julie on because she's been wanting to do a Dark Tower episode for a while, and then she surprised me when she hasn't seen it.
I can't even imagine what they're
So
going to say. I really don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, so I'm going to have to guide them through it and hear their virgin reaction. So I think we're calling it Dark Tower Virgins.
Beautiful.
But it should be interesting.
And over on Halloweenies Pod, we're doing our Universal Monsters year, and it's continuing on April's All Things Invisible Man. So on the main feed, we're going to have an episode on the top 10 best invisible movies. And at the end of the month, we're doing 1933's The Invisible Man, directed by James Whale. Really looking forward to that one. That movie is great. I don't know if you've seen that movie recently, but that might be the best Universal Monster movie.
Those really hold up. We did Creature from the Black Lagoon a couple of years ago, and I was surprised at how good and how fresh that felt.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because The Creature from Black Lagoon is almost 70 years old, and then The Invisible Man is 92 years old.
That's
so
so
crazy to think about. And on the Patreon for the Halloweenies Pod, which is, guess what, patreon.com/HalloweeniesPod, we've got a commentary track for maybe the most famous Invisible Man movie of them all, John Carpenter's Memoirs of an Invisible Man, with Chevy Chase, Daryl Hannah, and Sam Neill. Kind of an underrated movie, actually. We had a lot of fun with that commentary. Also on the Patreon, we're covering The Invisible Man from 2020, the Blumhouse Invisible Man. A good movie with Elizabeth Moss. So I'm looking forward to checking that episode out. But that's it. The final strike has been thrown. Casey has struck out. And Flieger, I guess all that's left to say is long days and pleasant nights.
You're out.
I got some hot friends. God, I got some hot friends. I got some hot friends. God, I got some hot friends. But you know you want somebody to treat you good.
You've made it to the end of another bloody, disgusting podcast. Congratulations. If you like our programming, consider searching for other bloody, disgusting podcasts, such as Creepy, Horror Queers, The Boo Crew, SCP Archives, Nightlight, Margaret's Garden, and more.